Imagine yourself standing before Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece, the Mona Lisa, gazing up at the radiant ceiling of the Sistine Chapel painted by Michelangelo, reading the revolutionary words of Copernicus that changed our understanding of the universe. This isn't just history. It's a revolution of thought. It was the Renaissance, a time when art, science, and philosophy exploded with brilliance, lighting up the old continent after centuries of darkness. And from that spark, Europe laid the foundation for its dominance across the globe for centuries to come. But why did it happen, and why then? If you could hop into a time machine and travel back to any point in history, Renaissance-era Europe might seem exciting, but make no mistake, it would have been a terrible choice. You wouldn't just witness the brutal chaos of endless wars, but also suffer under the harsh, unforgiving rule of the Catholic Church. It all began in 476 AD, when the mighty Roman Empire collapsed under the weight of barbarian invasions, especially the Germanic tribes, plunging Europe into what we now call the Dark Ages. From a unified empire, Europe fractured into scattered kingdoms. The Visigoths took over Spain, the Lombards claimed Italy, the Franks dominated Gaul, while the Angles and Saxons settled in Britain. But these tribes didn't coexist peacefully. Conflict and bloodshed were the norm. Then came the Black Death, a catastrophic plague that wiped out over half of Europe's population, turning despair into something almost apocalyptic. Amidst this darkness, the Catholic Church rose as the supreme power, controlling every aspect of life, politics, economy, and even personal belief. This immense authority crushed intellectual freedom. Thinkers like Galileo and Copernicus were branded heretics for challenging religious dogma and paid dearly for their ideas. For centuries, progress in Europe seemed frozen in time, but beneath that suffocating gloom, the seeds of change were quietly growing. Until one day, they burst into bloom, giving rise to a new era, the Renaissance, when light, knowledge, and art once again spread across the continent. The Renaissance, it all began in Italy, the very heart of the former Roman Empire. From this cradle of civilization, the movement took shape in the 14th century and gradually spread across Europe, becoming a sweeping revolution. But it was more than just a revival of ancient Greek and Roman ideals. It marked a dramatic shift in how people thought about themselves and the world around them. If a time machine dropped you into the dark chaos and rigid traditions of the Middle Ages, the Renaissance would be your saving grace. It was an era that placed personal growth, human values, and intellectual pursuit at its core. Thinkers of the time celebrated humanity as the center of the universe, championing creative freedom and the power of reason and science to explore the world. The return of intellectual light laid the foundation for groundbreaking innovations, from philosophy and politics to the arts. In the realm of thought and governance, figures like Erasmus, Thomas More, and Niccolò Machiavelli left a lasting mark. Machiavelli, in particular, challenged traditional ideas with his seminal work, The Prince, offering a bold new perspective on power and leadership. But the Renaissance wasn't confined to ideas alone. It was also an age of great exploration that reshaped world history. Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas, Vasco da Gama opened a sea route to India, and Ferdinand Magellan completed the first circumnavigation of the globe. These epic voyages didn't just expand Europe's geographic boundaries, they connected the continent to new civilizations, resources, and revolutionary ideas. The Renaissance also served as a launching pad for some of the most revolutionary scientific breakthroughs in history. Nicolaus Copernicus, with his heliocentric theory, dared to challenge the geocentric model that had dominated thought for thousands of years, paving the way for the scientific revolution. And Leonardo da Vinci was far more than just a painter of timeless masterpieces. He was a visionary inventor who sketched hundreds of designs for flying machines, weapons, and mechanical devices. Many of his concepts would later inspire modern technologies. This era also witnessed an explosion of artistic and literary achievement. Renaissance works not only enriched the cultural life of Europe, but also helped shape the intellectual spirit of the age. Renaissance culture was more than just a revival of ancient values. It was a springboard for the evolution of modern art, science, and philosophical thought. This intellectual awakening propelled Europe to a new height, not just for the continent itself, but for all of humanity. The Industrial Revolution. The Renaissance marked a turning point in how humanity viewed the world and its place within it. Where once European society was confined by the rigid boundaries of religion and conservative thought, the Renaissance brought a fresh wind of freedom, unleashing imagination and sparking creative thinking. Great minds of the era, from artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo to brilliant scientists and philosophers like Galileo and Francis Bacon, were united by one thing: dissatisfaction with the known limits. That very spirit of exploration and challenge became the guiding flame for the inventors of the next century, like James Watt, who developed the steam engine, and Richard Arkwright, the father of the modern factory system. More than that, the Renaissance was a moment of fundamental change in how people understood the natural world. Scientists like Copernicus, Galileo, and Johannes Kepler didn't just reshape our view of the cosmos, they established new standards for scientific inquiry. The scientific method they pioneered became a powerful tool, later applied widely across engineering and technology. Take Isaac Newton, for example. Deeply influenced by Renaissance thought, his laws of motion laid the groundwork for designing and operating complex machines. These principles would fuel the rapid development of machinery during the Industrial Revolution. At the same time, the trade routes discovered during the Age of Exploration brought immense wealth to Europe and created an increasing demand for mass production. This demand drove technological innovation and transformed production methods, paving the way for factories and modern industrial systems. The scientific and technological advances born from that brilliant era lit the path for Europe's global expansion and ushered in a new age of unprecedented change for the entire world. The rise of European colonialism. The Renaissance sparked a flourishing of science and commerce across Europe, and with it the rise of a new wealthy class, the modern bourgeoisie. As this class grew rapidly in wealth and influence, so too did their hunger for resources, a hunger that Europe's small, crowded continent simply couldn't satisfy. This need pushed European powers to seek gold, silver, spices, and slaves from distant lands, marking the beginning of the colonial age that would stretch across the entire globe. Technological breakthroughs in navigation, like the compass, detailed maps, and more agile ships, enabled Europeans to cross vast oceans and reach unfamiliar continents. Explorers such as Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Ferdinand Magellan didn't just chart new lands or open the door to global trade. They laid the foundations for centuries of European colonial conquest. The exploitation and control of colonial resources brought immense and long-lasting wealth to Europe. But for the indigenous peoples of the Americas, Africa, and Asia, it meant brutal exploitation, the loss of sovereignty, and the erosion of traditional cultures. Meanwhile, in Europe, the bourgeoisie, or capitalist class, continued to rise in power, transforming the old feudal system into a new social order based on market economies, industrial growth, and constant innovation. They became the driving force behind the birth of modern capitalism. But this progress came at a cost, even for Europeans. The division of Europe. It's hard to imagine that a golden age like the Renaissance, a time that revived literature, science, and art across Europe, also planted the seeds of deep division on the continent. By the 15th century, the idea of the nation-state began to take root. Secular governments gradually freed themselves from the grip of the Catholic Church, reducing the influence of the clergy in political affairs. In their place rose new states built on unique cultural identities, laying the groundwork for the formation of modern nations. One clear example comes from Germany. According to historian Felix Kistning, as early as 1813, King Friedrich Wilhelm III of Prussia emphasized national spirit in his rule, using it to secure loyalty and awaken a sense of resistance in newly annexed territories. This national identity was gradually woven into everyday life, shaping the beliefs of families, communities, and ultimately the German people as a whole. However, despite their cultural pride and ancient heritage, the German people found themselves outpaced by imperial powers like Britain and France. With their vast colonial empires, these nations quickly became global superpowers, while Germany struggled to assert its place on the international stage. Tensions over colonial ambitions and influence only escalated, eventually leading to World War I, but the story didn't end there. The idea of national identity, once a unifying force, became increasingly extreme. In particular, the emphasis on German cultural supremacy played a key role in igniting World War II. This second global conflict brought devastation on a far greater scale. More suffering, more loss, more destruction. Yet ironically, the same wars also propelled scientific and technological progress. Breakthroughs in physics, chemistry, and mechanics during the World Wars paved the way for modern military innovations, from firearms and artillery to advanced weapons systems that made warfare deadlier than ever before. The Renaissance may have ignited Europe's rise, but no golden age lasts forever. With every step forward came new fault lines, and the very light that once illuminated the continent would cast shadows that shaped the tragedies of centuries to come. The inevitable decline after the peak. The law of what rises must fall, or the rise and decline cycle, is a universal truth throughout human history, and Europe is no exception. Once a dominant force that shaped the modern world for centuries, Europe's golden age has given way to visible signs of weakness and relative decline. After being devastated by 2 world wars, Europe gradually ceded its global leadership to the United States in the second half of the 20th century. For decades, European values, from democracy to human rights, were seen as universal standards. But today, those values are increasingly being challenged by rising powers around the globe. China, with its bold ambitions, is reasserting itself on the international stage. Once a beacon of ancient civilization, Chinese culture and influence are rising again with confidence. Alongside Russia, China is championing the BRICS bloc, seeking to reshape the global order, which they argue has long been skewed in favor of the US and Europe. Even smaller nations are now crafting their own principles and standards. A prime example is ASEAN, a regional organization of Southeast Asian nations, which strives to forge an independent path. ASEAN's framework emphasizes neutrality, cooperation, and inclusiveness, allowing member states to avoid being caught in the geopolitical tug-of-war between superpowers like China and the US. Any nation wishing to engage meaningfully with ASEAN must accept its guiding principles. This approach has helped the region maintain autonomy, foster regional stability, and assert its own influence on the global stage. Ironically, most of these emerging powers, except for Russia, were once under European colonial rule during the age of imperialism. Yet over time, they have risen, evolved, and grown, not only in economic strength, but also in social development and cultural confidence. Europe may have once lit the torch of modern civilization, but history moves in cycles. And now, new voices are shaping the future. Voices that no longer echo from a single continent. Europe in crisis. Can the old continent reinvent itself? In stark contrast to its historical role as the center of global power, Europe now shows increasing signs of crisis, from economic stagnation to political and social instability. A growing lack of consensus within the European Union has become a major obstacle to unity and strength, just when the region most needs cohesion to face mounting global challenges. The sovereign debt crisis of the early 2010s shook the financial foundations of the EU, especially in southern countries like Greece and Italy. Despite ongoing efforts toward recovery, Europe's pace remains sluggish compared to that of the United States and China. European industries also face intense pressure from a surge of inexpensive imports from China, which has undercut local manufacturing sectors. Adding to the strain are deep-rooted demographic challenges. An aging population and a shortage of young labor have worsened the region's economic and social difficulties. Once seen as a land of promise for migrants from around the globe, Europe today finds itself grappling with ethnic tensions and terrorism. Mass immigration from the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia has certainly enriched Europe's diversity, but it has also sparked cultural and social frictions. Xenophobia and anti-immigrant movements have gained momentum, fragmenting societies that once prided themselves on unity and tolerance. Most troubling of all, the specter of war has returned to the continent. Since 2022, the war in Ukraine has had far-reaching consequences, particularly for neighboring countries. Despite efforts to contain the conflict, the situation remains volatile. This war has amplified a deeper political crisis within Europe, marked by the collapse of key national governments, even among the region's most developed states. Europe now faces a pressing question. Can it adapt and redefine its role in the modern world? History has shown that no empire stays at the top forever, but decline does not have to mean disappearance. Europe remains a vital center of culture, knowledge, and diplomacy. If it can weather today's challenges, it may yet retain its global relevance, even if its dominance is no longer absolute. Thank you for watching until the end of the video. If you found it interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next mysteries waiting beyond the veil. See you in the next mysterious journey.